Welcome to Vigorous Nutrition. I'm Coach Steve. In this video, we're going to discuss the ketogenic diet versus a diet with carbohydrates, whether you're in the off-season or a cutting phase. The final verdict, everything that goes along with a ketogenic diet or diet with carbohydrates and how they compare. Because I've done both over the last 20 years. I've done ketos during the off-season. I've done carb-cycling during a cutting phase. So we're going to discuss everything in this video and give you my thoughts and my verdict and what I feel is best, but it doesn't mean it might be the best diet for you. Again, just take everything in consideration. Take it as a learning experience. We're going to go all over the place because everything compares, and I might go from keto in the off-season to carb-cycling in the cutting phase. Bear with me here. It's all going to be relevant, and you can make an informed decision on which diet might be best for you in which situation. So let's start with my current situation. Carb-cycling during the off-season. I'm doing a low, medium, high day, depending on how I look, the body part I'm going to train, how heavy I weigh, how much I'm snoring, because I take all that into consideration. When I wake up, look at myself, check my body weight, ask my wife, was I snoring a lot, and then decide how much carbohydrates I'm going to take. And of course, I take into consideration which body part I'm going to train. So I do carb cycling based on the fly. You need a little bit more experience for that. Some people will be better off with a fixed diet, so you have a high, medium, low day. Some people would be better off with a consistent diet, so you just have like 500 carbs, so that's basically the medium day. Every day, it's a little bit easier to prepare meals in advance that way. And again, if you don't have so much experience within your body and you wake up and you can look in the mirror, check your body weight, and if you got the pillow to your head from your wife because she didn't sleep all night, you can decide on the fly how much carbohydrates you're going to take. Off-season is great. Now, in this scenario, your recovery is completely optimized because your glycogen stores are always saturated, so you got very high training capacity. The large amounts of carbohydrates that you're taking are incredibly amino acid sparing, so you can actually reduce the amount of protein that you're eating because you've got so many carbs in your diet. And again, protein takes a little bit longer to process and digest compared to carbohydrates, so you lower your protein intake, you increase your carbohydrate intake, and you can match calories if you want to. Lower your protein, increase your carbohydrates, and this is how you optimize digestion. Now, when you compare that with a ketogenic diet, since you still have low glycogen stores, and the fat that you take can only facilitate the energy demand that much, your protein intake is going to be a little bit higher compared to your protein intake during the off-season on a carbohydrate diet. So let's say your protein intake, just arbitrary numbers, maybe 20-25% higher compared to a off-season diet with carbohydrates. So I'm eating right now 275 grams of protein for 4,500 calories. But if I were to do a ketogenic diet during the off-season, my protein intake would probably be 325, maybe even 350. I've done 350 to get the same amount of recovery, right? Because now you don't have these carbohydrates in place to act as a protein sparing mechanism because you're on a ketogenic diet and your glucose stores are chronically depleted. Even though the relatively high protein intake on a ketogenic diet would cause a little bit of gluconeogenesis, which prevents you from depleting your glycogen stores too much. Dietary fats also work protein sparing, but they work through a different mechanism because they're not stored as intramuscular triglycerides as much as glycogen does. And since you're mostly burning energy, which is present in the muscle tissue while you're working out, your protein intake on a ketogenic diet needs to be slightly higher to compensate for the lack of protein sparing effect that you get from saturated glycogen stores. Man, it's a mouthful. Bear with me. All these little things contribute in your decision-making process. Yeah. So off-season scenario, protein intake can be reduced to the bare minimum required for recovery, given that your carbohydrate intake is as high as you can tolerate without getting fat and losing insulin sensitivity. That's at the end of the off-season. And with a ketogenic diet, your protein intake is going to be slightly elevated or maybe even moderately elevated compared to a diet with carbohydrates because you don't get that protein sparing effect, even though you get some sort of gluconeogenesis from the increased amount of protein that you're eating. In some cases, you might promote storage of the gluconeogenesis with a long-acting insulin, for example. Again, this is all at the advanced stages. I've done both. very high carb intake with low protein intake. That's where I'm working myself towards now. Moderate fat intake, just enough to facilitate recovery. And with a ketogenic diet, protein intake is a little bit elevated, and the dietary fat is significantly high to facilitate recovery, energy expenditure, training capacity. But again, you don't store as much glycogen, so you'll still need to do a refeed in the weekend and replenish glycogen stores for another week of heavy training, which you don't need to do during the off season when you're eating a significant amount of carbohydrates, because you're already in a chronically saturated glycogen state. You don't have to saturate your glycogen too much, maybe 90-95%, again, because when you reach 100%, you lose insulin sensitivity, and now the surplus of carbohydrates are not going to go into the muscle tissue, it's going to go into the fat tissue, and now you need to do a mini diet because you've lost insulin sensitivity and you're getting fat, which is very difficult to do on a ketogenic diet during the off season because you're always insulin sensitive. And even though you need a little bit of fruit on a ketogenic diet, especially when you start training at very high capacity, so you use the fruit and the fructose to replenish glycogen stores within the liver, which has an anti-catabolic effect preventing gluconeogenesis. Yeah, you see what I'm getting at, right? But you'll still need to replenish muscle glycogen stores with a weekend refeed, which is not required on a carbohydrate diet. And in more cases than not, on a carbohydrate diet during the off season, when it's time to have a cheat meal, you don't feel like it. Because you're always on high carb diet, you already have high food volume. Again, carbohydrates have much higher food volume compared to fat sources. Much larger food volume, you're constantly eating, constantly digesting, constantly going to the bathroom. By the time the cheat meal comes around, or you want to do a clean refeed, you don't really feel like it. So what I've done with most of my clients, you have your refeed, right? It's like 5,000 calories, for example. And during the week, they eat 2,500 calories. All right. We're going to bring those weekdays up to the refeed day. Now, over the course of weeks, every time you do a 10% caloric increase, you go from 2,500, 2,750, 3,000, 3,400. Slow, steady increases until you reach 5,000 calories. Now, every day is a 5,000 calorie day. You should be strong and looking pretty big. In more cases than not, since you're eating 5,000 calories every day, you're always full, you're always eating, you're always digesting, you're no longer looking forward to your cheat meal. And on days that you have your cheat meal, you might end up with less calories, simply because you're taking a little bit of a day off. So you have two bodybuilding meals in the morning, you do your workout around that time, then you have lunch and dinner. And lunch and dinner can be whatever it is. It's off season, you can relax a little bit. If you were to add up the calories at the end of the day, it's probably 4,000 calories because you didn't feel like eating so much because you're already doing that throughout the week. And even though a high fat and high protein diet with a little bit of vegetables mixed in gives you a very high sense of satiation, you're still looking forward to that refeed because your glycogen stores are depleted at the end of the week. So in the sense of refeeds and cheat meals during the off season, cheat meals on a ketogenic diet, you're looking forward to it. And cheat meals on high carb diet, you're not looking forward to it. You're probably going to end up eating less, because you're chronically full and chronically eating a lot of food volume, because carbohydrates, again, have more food volume. So those are the differences. Still, in this situation, because the workout capacity, the training intensity, the workload that you're able to do is much higher on a carbohydrate diet, I enjoy for the off season a carbohydrate diet more because it's more productive for training. Now, the downside is because you're eating so many carbs, you get all these blood sugar fluctuations throughout the day. So I noticed that on a sense of cognition, my cognition goes down at certain periods throughout the day because I'm in between meals. Again, you're switching your brains. Like I came from a ketogenic diet, right? So your brain is working in ketosis. It's always got ketones available, whether that comes from dietary fat sources or stored body fat. Your ketone levels are always going to be stable. Whereas on a carbohydrate diet, your brain is working on glucose. So the glucose is going to come from dietary sources, right? And you're digesting it. So you eat a meal. Over the course of 1.5 hours, your glucose levels are going to be elevated for your brain to function. Now the food is going to digest. Your glucose levels are going to go down a little bit. And the cognition goes down with it as well. So you're going through a little bit of a roller coaster when you're on a high carbohydrate diet. Again, when your meal timing is correct and you consume low, medium glycemic index carbs with a little bit of fat with each meal and sufficient amount of protein, it will keep your blood sugar levels stable and cognition shouldn't change that much. But in my opinion, and the opinion of most of my clients who I switch from a ketogenic diet to a carbohydrate diet, cognition, focus, energy levels throughout the day is much better on a ketogenic diet on comparable caloric intake. So let's say you're doing 5,000 calories with carbs, 5,000 calories with keto. Keto cognition is, I would say, twice as high compared to a carbohydrate diet. But I also think that with a carbohydrate diet, when you're eating a significant amount of carbs and you get all this, small blood sugar fluctuations, insulin release, it just makes you a little bit sleepy and it takes away from cognition. Again, we're not only training, right? We're not only spending 24 hours per day in the gym. We also got to work. We got a relationship, maybe kids, social things to uphold. Cognition is very important. So if let's say you're a full-time bodybuilder and you can kind of hide away from those kinds of responsibilities, a diet with high amount of carbohydrates, where you can just put everything in place for your bodybuilding, which I can, but I don't want to, where you can put everything into place, a carbohydrate diet will definitely improve the productivity of your workouts and the recovery. Yeah, because the carbs are protein sparing. Whereas with a ketogenic diet, you stay more productive during the day. And even though your recovery might be down a little bit and your workout capacity is not as high because you don't have so much glycogen stores, and you see the rep ranges are quite different, right? So a ketogenic diet, even during the off-season, the optimal rep range, in my opinion, is between 4 to 8 reps. Whereas with a carbohydrate diet, your rep range is ideally from 8 to 12. So the rep range is a little bit higher, even though the working weight might be a little bit higher because you have reduced rep ranges on a ketogenic diet. When you look at the muscle fibers, and then depending on which muscle fibers you have, is it the type 1, type 2, A, B, depending on which muscle fibers you have and how further you want to progress your physique, a carbohydrate diet might be more beneficial for your training or bodybuilding aspirations compared to a ketogenic diet, simply because they have different rep ranges and different muscle fibers respond to different rep ranges. But in a sense of cognition, again, I'm going all over the place, I'm sorry. Take from this video what you will. In the sense of cognition, a ketogenic diet, whether it's off-season or a cutting phase, it wins hands down over a diet with carbohydrates. But for productivity sense and recovery and bodybuilding, a diet with carbohydrates is more beneficial, maybe not twice as much, but maybe 50% as much compared to a ketogenic diet. Again, most of this body was built on a ketogenic diet. I look pretty big, I look pretty strong. If you want to reach the upper echelons of bodybuilding, carbohydrates are absolutely required. But it's not required if you want to be like medium bodybuilding. That's where I am, right? It's medium bodybuilding, not full-blown pro-level bodybuilding. So I would make weight in classic physique. Let's call that medium bodybuilding, because you don't have the carbohydrates available to push you past the plateau, because glycogen stores are going to be depleted, and that's going to be the rate limiting factor. And we don't want to drug our way out of this. Some of the guys did that. It doesn't look too pleasing, yeah? So let's say a ketogenic diet can bring you up to a medium level of bodybuilding, which would be considered as classic physique. And a carbohydrate diet can bring you all the way to the pro ranks, again, if your genetics allow it. So I would be considered a medium bodybuilder at 250 pounds in the off-season. And super high levels of bodybuilding would be like 270 to 300 pounds of off-season weight. Now, when it comes to electrolyte intake, it's a lot more nuanced on a ketogenic diet compared to a diet with carbohydrates, because glycogen helps to retain electrolytes. But in the lack of glycogen stores, you need to supplement or increase electrolyte intake because you don't have so much capability to retain it. Now, we're taking PEDs out of the consideration because in both scenarios, you can take nandrolone or anadrol or another compound that promotes mineral retention. Just for the sake of electrolyte intake, it's way more nuanced and way more important to manage your electrolyte intake when you're following a ketogenic diet, because you're not retaining as much compared to a diet with carbohydrates, because glycogen helps to retain electrolytes. Actually, potassium helps to retain glycogen, which then in turn helps to retain water, which contains sodium, potassium, magnesium. It's a cascade of effects. The glycogen contributes to water and mineral retention, whereas with a ketogenic diet, you need to increase your mineral intake to retain more water because you don't have glycogen to retain it. So in a ketogenic diet, you're salting all your meals heavily. Whereas with a carbohydrate diet, you really have to focus on your potassium intake because it helps to promote glycogen storage. And you'll need to focus on your B vitamin intake because it helps with glucose metabolism. But with a ketogenic diet, you really need to focus on your sodium intake because it helps to maintain intracellular, extracellular, and blood volume. But also on carnitine and vitamin A because those are used in fatty acid metabolism. So in a diet with large amounts of carbohydrates, you need to focus on your potassium and B vitamin intake. Whereas with a ketogenic diet with high amounts of fat intake, you need to focus on your carnitine and vitamin A intake because these micronutrients contribute to the metabolization of either fatty acids or glucose. And then glucose metabolization requires different micronutrients compared to the metabolization of fatty acids. The different pathways, different micronutrients. Now, when we compare these diets during a cutting phase or contest prep, I feel that a ketogenic diet is a little bit easier to follow, even though it's more restrictive, because your brain starts to work on ketones, it suppresses appetite a little bit, and your blood sugar levels are a little bit more stable, compared to dieting with carbohydrates when you do a high, medium, low day. In that case, your blood sugar levels might be all over the place throughout the day, which changes your mood, makes you a little bit irritable, or makes you very, very hungry at certain periods of the time, which makes it harder to follow the diet. So for beginners or intermediate lifters trying to get lean, I feel that a ketogenic diet is a little bit easier to maintain, even though it's very difficult to sustain in a social setting, because ketogenic diet is very, very restrictive, whereas with a carbohydrate diet, you have a little bit more freedom. And you could even do it if it fits your macros approach when you follow a diet with carbohydrates. Whereas with a ketogenic diet, that's almost impossible when you go out because everything has carbs. When you're following a diet with carbohydrates and for whatever reason you're forced to go out, you can kind of micromanage your calories, do your workout, go eat outside, do the best you can with the food choices you have available. It's almost impossible on a ketogenic diet. But I feel that beginners have a greater rate of success on a ketogenic diet compared to beginners following a carb-cycling diet, unless they're hardcore bodybuilders, of course, and you just suffer your way through. But with carbohydrates, you still get changes in your cognition and mood throughout the day and maybe, fluctuating blood sugar levels. And you don't have that with a ketogenic diet. So it might be easier to reach the end goal. But once you've reached the end goal, when your body's already used to carbs, you don't have a tendency to rebound as bad as you do with ketogenic diet. So a beginner following a ketogenic diet will reach their end goal perhaps a little bit easier, a little bit more successfully. And then they reach their goal and they start eating again, and they've excluded carbohydrates or fast processed carbohydrates throughout this period that they were dieting. Their blood sugar levels are going to go all over the place. They're going to be eating even though their stomach is full, again, because their blood sugar drops so much because of the high insulin sensitivity that they have. And they go completely out of control. And I've seen it happen many, many, many times. As soon as you have that first piece of cake, you have the whole pie, and then they're gone for a week on this eating holiday. And I feel that it doesn't happen so much when people diet on carbohydrates. Again, these are all for beginners. If you want to do a ketogenic diet, just make sure that the rebound is going to be horrendous. No ifs, no ways. Almost everybody's going to go through that. Whereas when you follow a carbohydrate diet and you suffer your way through the mood changes and the declining cognition, the rebound is not going to be as bad because your body still functions on carbohydrates. The insulin sensitivity is very, very good on the muscle tissue. Again, because these processes of carbohydrate metabolism are remained intact, because you've been focusing on your potassium and B vitamin intake. Whereas with a ketogenic diet, even if you focus on your B vitamin and potassium intake, these processes are not as optimized as a diet with carbohydrates. The rebound you really have to take into consideration when you reach single-digit body fat levels, because the rebound from a ketogenic diet, and I've gone through this many, many times myself, you start eating, your body fat reserves are going to be restored. So you have to look at the short term and the long term in this sense. And again, if you have a lot of experience, like I do, you can do a ketogenic diet and then slowly transition into carbs without any sort of rebound and just gain strength and size and, bring your muscularity up. So to bring it all back and compare both diets overall, I feel for performance, stamina, workout capacity, training intensity, and accrual of muscle tissue, a carbohydrate diet is the best, whether that's bulking or cutting. I feel that a ketogenic diet is much more beneficial when it comes to cognition, sense of well-being, mood, focus. It's easier to follow simply because the blood sugar levels are more stable. Your brain starts to work on ketones. And even though a ketogenic diet might not make you as productive in the gym as a carbohydrate diet, it certainly makes you more productive when it comes to work, relationships, overall sense of well-being, and just getting everything else done during your day. But carbohydrates are definitely full-time bodybuilder approved. Personally, I love the extra energy that I have during the workout, being able to train in a higher rep range, having more intensity and more energy available towards the later stages of the workout compared to a ketogenic diet, which is definitely more beneficial for cognition and productivity. Again, you'll have to decide what is more important to you. Do you want a full-time bodybuild or do you want to focus on business? I'm trying to combine both, which is certainly very, very difficult because the full-time bodybuilding might eventually detract from your productivity because you're so sleepy during the day because your workout capacity is so high. So that's why I moved my workout toward the later stages of the day, because if I train in the morning now, I'm just going to stare at the computer screen for about 2 hours, getting 2 meals in before I feel ready to get back to work. I'll do a separate video about what you can expect when you reach a certain weight during the off season. For me, it's about 250 pounds when my body kind of starts to reject all this extra weight. It might be 270 for you, 230 for somebody else. But at one point, your body will kind of reject the off season and you'll have to make some adjustments to keep you going. So a mini diet might be in order for me relatively soon because snoring might be a non-issue for you, but it is definitely an issue for your partner. We'll save that for a different video. Too long didn't read or didn't listen. Ketogenic diet for mood, cognition, sense of well-being, and a carbohydrate diet for bodybuilding and workout capacity in the gym. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like on your way out, and I'll see you in the next video.